Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're diving into something I think a lot of you will find pretty useful, pronunciation. We've got a bunch of sources here all about speaking English more naturally, clearing up those common pronunciation problems, things that can sometimes cause, well, misunderstandings, honestly.
Yeah, we've been looking at all these materials focused on just that, helping you sound better, more natural when you speak English. So our goal today is to really pull out the most important bits from all of this stuff and give you like actionable steps you can actually use to make your spoken English better and do it quickly.
Okay, so I guess the first thing we should talk about is why pronunciation is so important in the first place, right? I mean, if you've got the grammar down, isn't that like most of the battle?
Well, good grammar is definitely important, yeah, no question about it. But the interesting thing is, you can have perfect grammar and still not be understood if your pronunciation isn't clear. It's like, imagine you're trying to understand someone whose words are just a little bit off. It makes it harder to figure out what they mean, right? And, well, that can make the whole conversation more difficult for everyone involved.
Makes total sense. It's like trying to listen to a radio station that's just a little bit out of tune.
So, where do we even start with pronunciation problems? What's like a really basic thing people often struggle with?
One of the biggest ones is the "th" sound.
Mhm.
And actually, it's not just one sound. There are two. There's the voiceless "they," like in the word think, and the voice "thee," as in, this difference. It doesn't exist in a lot of languages, so it can be a real challenge for learners.
Yeah, I can see why. It always feels a little bit forced when I try to say it. How do you actually make those sounds correctly? Is there like a trick to it? Well, for both sounds, the most important thing is where you put your tongue. You want to gently put the tip of your tongue between your top and bottom front teeth. Now, for the voiceless, like in think, the key is airflow. You just gently blow air out through that little gap between your tongue and your teeth. You should feel a soft stream of air coming out. Try it. Think. Can you feel that?
Think, yeah, I can feel the air. It's like a little breeze. So how do we switch to the voiced fifth, like in this?
For this, the tongue stays in the same spot, but this time you use your voice. You should be able to feel a vibration in your throat as you push air out. Say this. Can you feel that little buzzing?
This, oh yeah, I can definitely feel the vibration now. So it really comes down to whether you use your voice or not.
Exactly. And, being aware of that difference and practicing it can really make a big difference in how clearly you're understood, especially for people whose first language doesn't have these sounds. It's really about training your mouth and throat to do something new.
Okay, so we've tackled the sound that some languages don't even have. Now let's talk about some of those everyday English words that people tend to uh, mispronounce. What are some of the biggest offenders?
Well, some words just get mispronounced so often that it becomes like the standard way people say them, even though it's not actually correct. Like, take the word develop. You'll often hear people say develop with the emphasis on the last part, but the correct way is develop with the stress on the second syllable. It changes the whole rhythm of the word.
DVELUP. Got it. It's amazing how much difference it makes just by changing which part of the word you emphasize. What's another one that people often get wrong?
Comfortable. People often say it like comfortable, but the way native speakers say it is more like CUMF parable. It's almost like that four part disappears completely. And this happens a lot in English, by the way. We tend to reduce vowel sounds in parts of the word that aren't stressed.
CUMF to parable. Yeah, that definitely sounds more natural. It's like the middle part just like melts away.
Exactly. Another one is chocolate. Many people pronounce it chocolate, emphasizing the last part, but it should be lit with a very short middle syllable.
CHOC-let. I've definitely heard both versions. What's one more?
Oh, February. This one always seems to trip people up. It's not February, it's February. That first R sound right after the B often gets missed or like mumbled.
February. Okay, those are really helpful examples. I think it's those subtle things, the stress and the missing sounds, that really help you sound more fluent and natural.
Absolutely. And, these mispronunciations can become habits without us even realizing it. So consciously working on correcting them takes effort, but it's really worth it to be understood more clearly.
Speaking of things that can be tricky, let's talk about silent letters. What's the deal with those? It sometimes feels like they're just there to confuse us.
Well, if you look back at the history of English, many of those silent letters are actually leftovers from older ways of pronouncing words, or they come from words borrowed from other languages like French or Greek. So they might seem random now, but they actually tell us something about the history of the word, its etymology. And sometimes knowing that history can actually help you remember how to spell the word, even if you don't pronounce that letter.
Okay,
That
history lesson noted.
Yeah.
So what are some of the silent letters we should really watch out for?
A really common one is the K at the beginning of words like knife. You don't pronounce the K at all, it's just knife.
Knife, knife.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's pretty well known, but it's still easy to forget sometimes, especially if you're speaking quickly.
Yeah.
What's another silent letter that often trips people up?
How about the word hour? The H at the beginning is silent. So we pronounce it hour, just like the word hour, meaning something belongs to us, which can be confusing because usually H makes that breathy sound.
Hour. Hour. Yeah, it makes sense when you hear it, but just looking at the word, there's nothing to tell you that the H is silent.
And then there's listen. A lot of people might want to pronounce that T in the middle, but it's silent. It's just listen.
Listen. Listen.
Hmm.
Got it. It's those silent letters in the middle of words that sometimes throw me off the most. What's one more?
Oh, the word debt. The B at the end is silent, so it's pronounced debt. It's another one where a letter that usually has a very clear sound just disappears when you say the word.
Debt. Debt. All these examples just show how strange the relationship between English spelling and pronunciation can be. It's like there are all these hidden rules.
Exactly. And, learning these common silent letters can really help you avoid some very obvious pronunciation mistakes and, well, make you feel more confident when you're speaking.
Okay, so we've covered some tricky sounds and those silent letters. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about grammar. Are there any common grammar mistakes that people make specifically when they're speaking English?
Definitely. Learners often spend a lot of time trying to learn all the complex grammar rules, but some of the most common mistakes in spoken English are actually about very basic things like sentence structure and verb conjugation, and sometimes these little mistakes can also make it harder for people to understand you.
Can you give us a few examples? What are some of those grammar gremlins that often pop up in spoken English?
One very common one is with the third person singular present tense. You might hear someone say, she don't like coffee, but the correct way is she doesn't like coffee. That S ending on the verb is something that's easy to forget when you're speaking.
Right, it's a tiny thing, but it really stands out when it's missing. What's another one?
Talking about age, people sometimes say, I have 25 years old, but the right way to say it is, I'm 25 years old. In English, you use the verb to be to talk about your age.
Oh yeah, that's a classic mistake. I've heard that one a lot. What's another example?
You'll often hear things like, he go to school every day, when it should be, he goes to school every day. Again, it's that S ending on the verb that's so important. It's easy to miss these little details when you're focused on just getting your message across.
So it seems like those little verb agreement rules are a big thing to watch out for in spoken English.
Exactly. And just like we were talking about with pronunciation, the key is to really listen carefully, both to other people speaking English and to yourself when you speak, and then be willing to correct yourself when you make a mistake.
All right, so we've given everyone a lot of specific things to pay attention to and practice. Now, for our AI learning tip of the day, how can technology help us improve our pronunciation and grammar in spoken English?
This is where things get really cool. There's a great tool you can use to practice your pronunciation, and you probably already have it on your phone. Speech-to-text apps like Google Assistant or Siri.
Oh, that's a really smart idea. How does that work?
It's pretty simple, but it can be really helpful. Try saying a sentence in English, maybe focusing on one of the difficult words we talked about earlier, or using a grammar structure you're trying to learn. Then, see if the AI understands what you said and writes it down correctly. If it gets it wrong, that means you need to work on your pronunciation a bit more.
So it's like getting instant feedback on how well people understand you without having to ask anyone.
Exactly. You can then try saying the same sentence again, but changing your pronunciation a little bit until the AI gets it right. It's a fun way to train your ear to hear the correct sounds and to train your mouth to make those sounds.
That's a fantastic tip, and it's so easy to do. I love how we can use AI to actually help us learn languages.
It's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
You're basically turning a tool that's meant for voice commands and dictation into your own personal pronunciation coach. It's a perfect example of how we can use everyday technology in new and creative ways to help us learn.
Awesome. So as we wrap up this deep dive into English pronunciation and common mistakes, What are the most important things you want our listeners to remember?
Well, remember that clear pronunciation is absolutely essential if you want people to understand you. Remember the specific ways to make those tricky th sounds. Remember the correct pronunciation of those common words we talked about, like develop, comfortable, chocolate, and February. And be aware of those silent letters in words like knife, hour, listen, and debt.
And what about grammar? What should we focus on there?
Pay close attention to those verb endings, especially in the third person singular present tense. And remember the right way to use the verb to be when you're talking about your age. And don't forget to use those speech to text apps to get feedback on your pronunciation. They can be really helpful.
Great summary. So as you go about your day, start paying attention to these little details. Really focus on making that th sound correctly. Remind yourself how to say comfortable the right way, and maybe even have a chat with your phone's voice assistant just for practice.
And here's something to think about. What's the one thing about English pronunciation or grammar that you find the most difficult? And how could playing around with speech to text tools help you figure out how to improve? It's a simple experiment, but it could give you some really valuable insights into your own learning process.